Suretyship is another area that's of contract law that comes up a lot in the context of construction contracts, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. The basic definition of a surety is somebody who undertakes to pay money or take any other action if the principal obligor or the principal debtor fails or defaults. Now, you may remember this from first-year contracts because one of the categories of contracts under the statute of frauds, it has to be memorialized by some sort of writing signed by the party against whom the promise is sought to be enforced, is suretyship contracts, in addition to real estate contracts and contracts that can't be performed within a year. So suretyship comes up in other contexts, but especially in the context of construction. And the basic concept here is that typically contractors will have surety companies that write payment and performance bonds on behalf of the contractor. And the surety contracts are written by essentially commercial sureties. They're not quite insurance companies, although very often the insurance companies will have a suretyship division that writes surety bonds, but it's not quite the same thing as insurance, as surety lawyers are glad to point out. The way this comes up specifically in a construction contract, as I say, is there are two types of bonds that are typically required. And the first one is a performance bond, and there's an AIA form, the A312, that protects the owner if the contractor defaults. Contractor's got a lot of obligations under a construction contract in terms of time, money, quality of work, etc. And what the performance bond essentially does, it's a risk mitigation device so that if the contractor breaches its obligations under the construction contract, and worst case scenario, the contractor walks off the job or becomes bankrupt, let's say. The idea of a performance bond is that the owner can call upon the surety, the commercial company that's written this performance bond, to step in where the contractor was and finish the work. It gets more complicated than that, and we'll take a look in class at the A312 itself so you can see what the surety's options are. But it's basically a way of backstopping the contractor's obligations so that if the contractor goes under, the owner's not left just without any sort of remedy. Now, it's important to get straight on the lingo that's used. The owner is typically referred to as the obligee under the performance bond, which is a kind of contract. The contractor is referred to as the principal or the principal obligor, and the surety is referred to either as a surety or a secondary obligor. There's a whole restatement of suretyship and guarantee on this subject. It uses the terms principal obligor and secondary obligor. What they're talking about is the principal debtor, in the case of a construction contract, the contractor, that is the party who's principally responsible for performing the work under the contract. And performance bonds are not long, they're about a page or so, and basically they just amount to a promise on part of both the contractor and the surety to the owner that if there's a problem and the contractor defaults under the terms of the bond, under the terms of the construction contract, which are incorporated into the bond, and the owner declares the contractor to be in default, then the surety's obligations are triggered. It's a promise that's made jointly by the contractor and the surety to the owner. But it's all for the owner's benefit to make sure that the project gets completed. Typically, these are written in, there's a ceiling to the surety's liability. It's referred to as the penal sum of the bond, and it's usually the 100% of the contract price. So if you've got a $30 million office tower that's being built, then the performance bond will be in the amount of $30 million. That'll be the face amount of the bond. And sureties are very careful to avoid doing anything that would expose them beyond that $30 million penal sum. Okay, the second kind of bond, surety bond, that you see on construction projects, somewhat confusingly, payment bonds are also titled A312 in the AIA family of documents. Purpose of a payment bond is not to protect the owner directly. It does indirectly protect the owner, but what the payment bond does is ensure that any unpaid subs and suppliers will get paid. So if the contractor, for example, is having cash flow problems and is getting paid by the owner, but then is frittering away the money somehow and not paying its subs and suppliers, those subs and suppliers may have a claim under the payment bond against the surety. Okay, here again, you've got three parties to the payment bond: the owner, the contractor, and the surety. And the contractor and the surety both make a promise to the owner under the payment bond that subcontractors and suppliers will get paid. The subcontractors and suppliers are not themselves parties to the contract. They are third-party beneficiaries of payment bonds. That is, the owner, surety, and contractor all intend to give the unpaid subcontractors and suppliers the benefit of the contractor and surety's promise to the owner that the subcontractors and suppliers will get paid. So in practical effect, what a payment bond does is protect subcontractors and suppliers if a contractor fails to pay them. It also has the effect of protecting the owner from liens against the real property where the project's being constructed, because in most jurisdictions, subcontractors and suppliers to construction projects will have, by statute, lien rights against the real property as a kind of, it's almost like a mortgage. It's a claim against the real property that can become a cloud on the title to the real property. But in addition to avoiding that problem that you have with unpaid subs and suppliers, the owner also has an interest in seeing that subs and suppliers get paid, because the owner wants them to keep working, even though the owner doesn't have a contract directly with the subs and suppliers. Right? It's the contractor that has the contract directly with the subs and suppliers. Nevertheless, the owner has an interest in the subs and suppliers staying on the job, because turnover in subs and suppliers creates delay and often increased costs and claims and all sorts of problems. In the lingo of the A312 payment bond, you have the same description of owner, contractor, surety, and the subcontractors and suppliers are referred to as claimants. So suretyship is a key concept in construction law, because there are so many risks and so many thinly capitalized parties to the construction process, particularly contractors and subcontractors, that it's important to owners to have some assurance, some deep pocket to look to in the event that there are problems on the project, and either the performance of the construction is grinding to a halt or getting delayed, whatever. That may be where a performance bond surety has to step up, or where there are unpaid subs and suppliers, in which case the payment bond surety may have to step up. Typically, these are the same company that write both bonds at the same time, usually for the same premium, and they both have the same penal sum, that is, whatever the contract sum is. So if you have a $30 million office tower, the contract price is $30 million for the construction. There will be a performance bond for $30 million. That's the ceiling of the surety's exposure under the performance bond. And likewise, the penal sum of the payment bond will also be $30 million. So that'll be the ceiling on the surety's exposure under the payment bond.